Greetings, boils, ghouls, and all of the macabre manner of being, and welcome back to the Oxley for yet another video. God, it's been another long year, hasn't it? We've finally made it back to spooky season, and to continue this year's festering festivities, I thought we would take a look back at yet another forgotten film. For today's topic, we have When Good Ghouls Go Bad, starring none other than Uncle Fester himself, Christopher Lloyd. This film, which originally aired on October 21st in 2001, was based on a concept by the man, the myth, the Stephen King of children's literature himself, Robert Lawrence, aka R.L. Stine. Strangely, this feature, which aired on Fox Family in October, wound up being released on home media in September 4th of that year, according to Amazon. And even further back, the book adaptation was released on August 21st, 2001, according to Google. In today's video, I shall be taking a look back at this film while adding tidbits from the book as we go, because there's certain points in the film that don't quite make sense if you haven't read the book first. At least they didn't make sense to yours ghoulie. With that said, let's quit delaying and get on with this, shall we? Here we go! To start things off, we have the dark insides of a pumpkin which has just been carved by our main character, Danny Walker, who gets revealed as he removes the chunks of gored flesh from his freshly carved vegetable. Danny picks up his creation and takes it out onto the front porch, where he places it on the top step and narrowly avoids getting hit by a newspaper that zips past his head. He squints his eyes at the paper boy who threw it and then goes back inside for breakfast. Once there, we get to see a random spaceman asleep at the dining room table. According to the book, the seemingly random spaceman is actually Danny's grandfather, known as Uncle Fred. But you wouldn't know that unless you'd read the book first, because he's never shown wearing this outfit aside from this one point in the film. The narrator, who happens to be Christopher Lloyd, goes on to chronicle Danny's day at school, from when he gets to deal with the kids during the ride to school, to the principal glaring at him when he gets to the school, to the janitor spilling mop water on his shoes, right up to gym class where he gets tackled by every kid, even his own teammates, when he fumbles catching a football. Doesn't that just remind me of childhood? For those of you who cannot relate, be thankful. But anyway, this isn't about me and my trauma. This is about our man Dan over here and his traumas. No, not that Dan. This one.
Danny didn't really lose consciousness.
Can I just say here that those children are using the wrong form for carrying a wounded player off the field? Because they really are. I mean, what if Danny would have had a spinal injury or worse? All that jostling around like that could have done some serious damage. So after being tackled to smithereens, Danny goes into possum mode and plays dead, laying limp upon the ground and acting unconscious. The coach winds up having him hauled off the field to where the school's nurse comes by to check on him. Also, now's a good time to bring up that, in the book, this scene is slightly extended, with Danny staying in possum mode for a bit before acting as though he's feeling better and sitting up, and then the coach gets the nurse to go and check him out. Whereas here in the movie, it just cuts straight from him getting hauled off the field over to the nurse already on the phone trying to get a hold of Danny's father without any luck. Anyway, let's continue. After that, we cut to Danny making his way home when he happens to spot Dana, a girl from school who he happens to have a crush on, and he embarrasses himself by walking right into a telephone pole while being distracted by her. I honestly feel kind of bad for Christopher Lloyd here, because it seems like he's really having to rush to get these lines out in a timely manner so they'll actually fit the scene. It just seems like this whole voiceover nonsense was thrown in at the last minute, just an afterthought, really. Regardless. Then after that, Danny gets to deal with Ryan Cankle and his toady as they try to scare him with a lame jump out and say boo prank. They lead him into the cemetery where they intend to force him to go into a crypt and look at a statue. At the same time, they go on to give the backstory of the statue and also the story of why the town hasn't celebrated Halloween in the last 20 years. According to the legends they tell him, there was a boy back in 1981 named Curtis Danko. He was different than the other kids, and because of that, he was kind of an outcast from the rest of the kids in school. One day, the town decided that they were going to put up a statue in the town square as a way to celebrate the big centennial, and they decided to have the kids in school create statues of their heroes. Then people could vote on which statue they liked the best, and the one who got the most votes would be put in the town square for everyone to see. While his classmates would work on their creations during the day during art class, Curtis would only keep his covered up, and he would come back at night to work on it when no one was around to bother him. He would also use jars of fireflies to light his way. In the book, it explains here that the reason for the fireflies was due to the fact that he didn't want anyone to see he was at the school building after hours. So he would leave the art room's lights off, so no one would have any inkling that he was there, and go sneaking trying to catch a peek of his sculpture before it was finished. It's also revealed here that what happens next was in fact, at least in part, young Coach Cankle's fault. On Halloween night in 1981, Curtis was working on his statue as usual when Mike Cankle and his friends happened to notice a green glow coming from the school and figured that it must be Curtis up there working. Then it flashes to the next morning where Cankle happens to find Curtis' charred remains in the kiln along with his finished statue and a message written in his ashes that if the town ever has another Halloween, he would come back to destroy them all. Also, the young Coach Cankle is apparently blinded for several days upon looking at Curtis' statue, which he heroically covered up so no one else would have to suffer the effects of looking at it, claiming that it looked like something only someone who had met the devil face to face could have sculpted. So with this information, Danny does the sensible thing and runs off while Ryan's toady is distracted undoing the lock and chains around Curtis Danko's grip. A chase ensues, with Danny leading the dork all the way back to his house and culminating with a wild barbarian swinging an axe around and scaring the bully off. The barbarian, as it turns out, is just Uncle Fred in a costume. He helps Danny to his feet and introduces himself as Galrath the Executioner, before leading the way back inside and accidentally burying that axe in the wall and getting it stuck. We also get some more of Christopher Lloyd's rushed dialogue as he comments about what's happening on screen, as well as his on-screen self having a little back and forth with Danny about how James, Danny's father, is so busy with his work. Danny even goes on to comment about his father having been so absent this year that his costume should be the Invisible Man. Clever kid. After this, we get to find out that Ryan has stolen Curtis Danko's statue. Damn, that kid's evil. First, he's trying to force Danny to look upon some sculpture that could potentially blind him, or worse, and now he's grave robbing with the intent to extort people for money? Man, I thought my grade school bullies were bad. Next, we cut back to Danny and Uncle Fred as they're trying to decide which Hot Wheels car to send down a track the two had set up off-screen. In the middle of their conversation, Danny's father comes in, and we get to learn that the reason why he's been so absent in Danny's life lately is that he's been hard at work getting the old candy factory up and running again, and it's for this reason that he's been neglecting his duties as a parent. He quickly mentions that he's been working on a spooktacular event, and says that he's running late for a town meeting where he plans to unveil it to everyone. Danny tries to warn him about what he just learned about the town's superstition and the curse of Curtis Danko, but James is so late for his meeting that he just brushes Danny off and leaves. At the town meeting, he starts making his speech, but keeps getting interrupted whenever he's about to mention when he's about to mention the H word. This confuses him, but he carries on and things seem to be going well until he unveils his plans for the spooktacular on Halloween, and people flee from the building. We smash cut back to the Walker residence, where James and Fred are talking about what happened. We also find out that the reason why Uncle Fred shut down the factory and basically turned his back on the town is because he was the one who built the kiln in which Curtis Danko perished. Next we cut to Uncle Fred as he's preparing to leave. He's planning to drive down to Cape Kennedy to see a space shuttle launch like his son James had wanted to do back when he was a kid, and Fred had just never had the time for it.
If I drive, they
He asks Danny if he wants to go, but Danny says he can't due to having school. Fred offers to write a note for him, but Danny reminds him that the school wouldn't take it because he's not his real father. He goes to leave, but out on the front lawn is the whole town with torches and rakes. They're angry because someone wound up decorating the whole town for Halloween, and they blame the Walker family for it. Danny and Uncle Fred follow the people to the town square after the sheriff pulls up and says that they won't believe what's been put up there. Everyone arrives, and we get to see a massive pile of pumpkins. An impossible pile of pumpkins, as Uncle Fred says. He then goes and takes a gourd from the pile before proclaiming, "Happy Halloween!" and tosses the vegetable above his head before catching it again. Moments later, there's a rumbling sound as the pile of pumpkins begins to come undone. It collapses on top of and kills Uncle Fred right there in front of everyone. We cut to Fred's funeral, where the whole town has shown up to mourn the loss. Danny gives him a final send-off by sending his favorite Hot Wheels car, the Red Baron, down a little track, and the car lands right on top of the coffin's lid. After that, he has a minor blow-up with his father after James says that he also misses him, and Danny confronts him about whether or not he really knew the man. He then runs off with Dana, who happens to also be at the funeral, following behind him. Another cut brings us back to Danny, who's sitting on a bench in the middle of a little moat as Dana comes over to try and comfort him by telling him about how it was for her when her grandparents died. She talks to him about what happens to people's bodies after they die, and he asks, "Aren't you a cheerleader?" Next we cut over to Curtis Danko's crypt, where the sheriff is seen messing with the padlock. I guess Ryan must have just put the chains back on after he stole the statue before. That child seems just a little bit too clever to be just some random jock. Devious, even, to cover his tracks like that. Someone really needs to keep an eye on that child. Next thing you know, he'll be some kind of criminal mastermind or something. Now it's back to Dana and Danny, only now they're walking up to Curtis Danko's old house, which has apparently been abandoned since his passing. Dana suggests that they go inside, and Danny's noticeably worried about the idea, but she winds up convincing him to do it anyway. It turns out that she and the rest of the kids in town have turned the place into an honest-to-goodness haunted house, like at a carnival. Soon, though, they're interrupted when Ryan Cankle and his goons show up. The two want to put Curtis Danko's statue in a room at the top of the stairs, and they make threats against Danny and Dana if they don't comply. Danny caves to their demands almost immediately, and this causes Dana to get mad at him, storm out of the house, and cut the power, leaving him in the dark all by himself.
Dana?
Now we cut to Danny walking home, as the town is shown taking down every single last one of those Halloween decorations. We also see Coach Cankle driving around in the Cankle-mobile, and reminding everyone that how even one single piece of Halloween garland could spell disaster. Danny gets home and is shocked to find all of Uncle Fred's Hot Wheels tracks set up with cars whirring along them. Even his old jukebox is set up and playing the song that he'd always choose. He finds that the model spaceship Fred had been working on is now fully completed on the dining room table, but he receives the biggest shock of all when he finds Uncle Fred himself in the dining room.
It's you.
It turns out that he's not quite as dead as everyone thought he was. Or so it would seem. For you see, he's still just as talkative and lively as he was before, only now his skin is more grey and mottled. And when Danny gives him that hug, you can't quite hear, the old ticker thumping around in Uncle Fred's chest. And this was explained in the book, but not the movie. And truth be told, when I first saw this, I was a bit confused as to why Danny started acting strangely after that hug, because it didn't quite register to me that though the rest of his body was, up and moving around and stuff, his heart was still and lifeless as the day he died. Yeah, you could say I'm a little slow on the uptake, and that's a fair assessment, but that's not important to the story right now. So let's get back to the film. The two of them have a nice little reunion until they hear the Cankle-mobile outside, and Uncle Fred decides to go out and handle things himself. Though Danny protests this, citing that perhaps this new lease on life of his is actually more of a rental, Fred marches outside anyway and scares the wits out of the Cankles and Ryan's goon friend. Alright, I just want to pause right here and say that in the book version of this, the Toady character, the guy who's hanging out with Ryan all the time, he's referred to as Leo. But I don't believe it's ever actually mentioned in the film, because in the movie, he just keeps getting referred to as Dork by Mr. Cankle over there. So for the remainder of this review, I shall be referring to the Toady as Leo. Okay? Good. Now let's keep going. In the process of scaring them out of their minds, Fred winds up losing a hand, which gets severed by the electric window of Cankle's truck before they speed away screaming. Fred, taking all of this in stride, looks around to the neighbors who happens to witness all of this, and he asks proudly if they'd also like a piece of him. And then, as they scramble away in fear, he hops into his car and goes after Cankle to get his hand back. My, that Fred, what a guy.
See you later.
The Cankles dump the hand into a metal trash can unceremoniously in their garage, and put a cinder block on top to keep it in. Soon after, a couple of fireflies, presumably the same ones we saw back at the Curtis Danko haunted house and the eye sockets of that skeleton, fly into the garage and make their way into the can through several rusted-out holes in the side.
Don't you get it?
A quick cut finds us inside the Cankle household, where Mike is telling his wife all about what just happened, as well as his conspiracy theory that the walkers had this planned as a publicity stunt for the German investors James invited to town to make them give him money to get the chocolate factory up and running again and to save the town. She makes the comment curiously about that being a good thing, until he reminds her of the curse of Curtis Danko. Then Ryan proves just how much of a suck-up he is to his father by telling him that he's his hero after that insane rant. Now we go over to Danny as he finds Dana at the Danko spook house and starts telling her about what's going on. Just then, Dana's mother shows up and confronts her about the $600 electric bill she just got in the mail, thanks to all the power the haunted house has been using. Now, to some of us in the year 2024 here, $600 for powering that much stuff doesn't seem like that would be that bad. But when we pull out the old inflation calculator and we compare what the prices for things were like back then compared to what they are now, the $600 bill that Mrs. Taylor was, having to pay turns... If she were paying that bill today, she would be paying $1,066.50. Good gravy. No wonder she's so mad. Dana's mother then tells her that she can either pay for the bill with her allowance for the next 370 years, or go with her to the Cankle for Mayor silent auction and Oktoberfest thing that she herself is having to attend. Danny volunteers for them both to go, much to Dana's chagrin, and Mrs. Stenson, Dana's mother, attempts to contact Danny's father to let him know where he's going to be. Surprisingly, she manages to get through and has a quick little talk with him about how he needs to be there more for Danny. Soon after, we cut over to see Uncle Fred in his car, parked across the street from the Cankle estate, as he calls it. The voiceover tells us that he's been trying to figure out a way to get inside, when suddenly a car pulls up. It turns out to be the children's entertainer, Cheesy the Clown, and Fred gets an idea when he sees that the entertainer has a fake hand prop. He bribes the clown and switches places with him in order to get inside the house and get his hand back. Inside at the party, the kids apparently really want to see that dang clown and are all chanting, "We want Cheesy! We want Cheesy!" At the same time, Coach Cankle and his wife are holding their silent auction, and it's going pretty poorly as one would expect, since apparently everyone in town seems to be unemployed and haven't any money to spend on any of the Cankle's nonsense.
We're unemployed. Hey, this is a silent auction.
Now we cut over to Uncle Fred in full clown makeup as he looks into the Cankle-mobile in search of that hand of his. Obviously it's not there, but a moment later he hears rattling coming from a nearby trash can, the same one the Cankles put the hand in earlier, and then the lid, along with the cinder block on top of it, blows off, and the hand along with those fireflies bursts forth and rushes into the house. He goes to chase after it, but is greeted by the coach, who promptly drags him to the party to entertain those children as his hand watches from a nearby doorway. Then it races upstairs and finds Ryan's room, along with the key to Curtis Danko's crypt.
He's gonna pee his pants. Am I gonna pee my pants too?
Now you may be asking yourself what the key was doing in the hands of that brat to begin with. Well, it turns out that his father is the one who put that lock on the crypt to begin with. Now, this would explain why he would have the key, which also makes it make sense why Ryan had it earlier when he tried to make Danny go in there in the first place. But it's also starting to become more and more suspicious that Ryan's father is so paranoid about making sure that no one goes in there, isn't it? Like, he was the only person to go in there into that kiln and to see Curtis's statue in the first place. He was the first one to find the body with the words written in the ashes, the curse and all that. Seems something awfully screwy is going on around there, doesn't it? But for the moment, let's just continue watching and see how this plays out. At the party, James Walker, Danny's dad, shows up after having decided to take the night off. It turns out that his secretary volunteered to pick up the German investors, so now he's free to spend some time with Danny for a change. Danny's reluctant at first because he's still trying to keep an eye out for his grandfather, aka Uncle Fred, who it turns out gets dragged to the party at the same time Danny's trying to get his father to go back to work. The clown-dressed corpse performs a magic trick for the kiddies by having Danny shake hands with him. Of course, the hand pops off, having been the prop hands that Uncle Fred had seen Cheesy with earlier, and this is when he takes the hand from the screaming child, tosses it up into the air, and lands it in his pants. Moments later, he tells the gathered children that his magic hand has disappeared, and that he'll give whoever can find it first $100.
Bill!
Obviously, the kids jump on him before he tells them that it's in the house, and they go scrambling over themselves to get into the building, searching for the five-fingered runaway, knocking over Coach Cankle in the process. This angers the Cankle, and he starts marching over to confront Cheesy. Before the coach can get there, though, Danny goes to ask Fred what's going on, and he and Cankle wind up having a tug-of-war that, with the accidental help of Fred's hand, leads to the corpseified Walker winding up a quadriplegic and a tuba case. The hand runs off with the key, then it cuts to James and Taylor leaving the party, and James starts flirting with her, plucking a rose from a nearby bush and presenting it to her. They seem to be hitting it off pretty well until they notice that someone's put up Halloween decorations around the neighborhood, even going so far as to paint a jack-o'-lantern grin on his Volkswagen Beetle. They both sober up real quick at this point and simultaneously agree that they hope it was their kids that did this, otherwise this would be extremely creepy. Then they hop into Taylor's car and leave. We cut back over to Dana and Danny as they're still carrying their Fred in the box and trying to figure out how to reassemble him. Danny randomly starts freaking out at this point. He tells Fred about how when he went by the cemetery earlier, he said that there weren't any holes in the graves, not even his. Then the trio pieced together that it had to have been someone already underground who got him out of his coffin. Just then we see that Uncle Fred's not the only one who's come back from the grave, as they soon spot a group of the undead coming towards them. After a nice little transition showing some scenic shots of the cemetery and some headstones, we cut over to see the sheriff as he's patrolling the place. Just then a jack-o'-lantern splatters onto his windshield, and he notices Curtis Danko's crypt is open. Then he sees Curtis Danko himself hurrying away from it. Next we cut to James' secretary speeding down the road, blaring some classical music with the German investors in the backseat looking terrified. They are forced to come to a screeching halt, though, when they see that the road is blocked off with pumpkins, and that there's a zombie in the road. More of the undead gather around the car and start chanting, "Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat." They freak out, and we cut to Danny and Dana at the Walker residence, as the duo are reattaching Uncle Fred's limbs, mostly off-screen, thank goodness, using a power drill and some wood screws with comedic results.
How come my boots are on the wrong feet?
Shortly after, Fred's hand comes back, still in possession of the crypt key, and we then cut away again to find ourselves with Ryan and Leo as they retrieve Curtis' statue from the shed. Another cut finds us back over with Danny, Fred, and Dana as Danny informs the other two about what we already know, about the key the hand has, and then Fred scolds it like a puppy, saying, "What did you do? What did you do?" Yet another cut finds us back at the Cankle place as the coach is struggling with taking down the new set of decorations on his front porch. His wife comes over with oven mitts and tongs, asking if they would help, but he just sends her away. Just then the sheriff arrives and informs Cankle about what he saw at the cemetery. It's at this point that we get another hint about what really happened to Curtis that night. That apparently the sheriff was also involved somehow, as Cankle tells him that he'd better find that statue before Curtis finds him, because they both really know what happened to him, don't they?
Now don't we, Ed?
Another cut finds us at Curtis Danko's old house, where Ryan and Leo have just set up the statue. They high-five each other and then leave, and we smash cut to the secretary and the Germans driving around with zombies on the car, still chanting "Truth, Gore, Truth." They zip past James and Taylor, and then we cut over again to Danny and Dana as they get Uncle Fred's feet put back on the correct legs. After getting Fred back into one piece, Danny starts having another freak-out about everything that's going on. From Fred's death, to his coming back, to his limbs coming off, to them reattaching them, and now zombies? Just fair warning you folks, the movie is about to have one hell of a mood swing. You know how things started off kind of fun, and then, well, they got kind of sad, and now they're kind of spooky and fun again? Well, we're about to make a hard left right back into the sad territory, so be sure to keep those tissues handy, because if you've ever lost a loved one in your life, this next part is going to hit pretty close to home. Truth be told, I tried to start this review back in June, and I wound up in such a depressed state after reading the book and watching the movie back to back that it took me until the end of August, really, to get my head back on straight and get back into this. So, yeah, my dear viewers, you have been warned. Now let's get back to the movie. Uncle Fred tries to reassure him and calm him down, and then starts recollecting about all the fireflies that they had caught that summer, commenting on how when the weather turned cold, they just never came back. He asks Danny what he thinks happened to them, and the boy simply replies, they died. Then Fred reminds him about this weird kid who would smash them up and put the glowy stuff all over his face like war paint, and how it still glowed even though the fireflies were all mushed up. He asks Danny why he thinks that glowy stuff still glows.
Why do you think that happens?
Danny replies that it's just a chemical reaction in the air, and Fred tells him that it's magic. He goes on to say that when all those millions of fireflies die, their bodies become undone and release their magic into the ground, and how it just collects down there, waiting for someone to use it. But in order to use it, you've got to wish harder than you've ever wished for anything, to still be here with the people you love. Then Dana makes it awkward by saying, or the people you hate. She goes on to say that if Fred could wish himself back, then so could Curtis Danko to exact his revenge.
Why couldn't Curtis Danko?
Fred chimes in, especially if he had help. Someone pulls into the driveway, and Danny and Dana start to cover up Fred, and we get another jump over to Town Hall. Everyone is gathered, and Cankle is trying to force the mayor to let them vote for the election early. The mayor reminds them that the election isn't until November, and Cankle reports that by then it'll be too late! Another quick cut finds us following a group of the undead as they stagger their way toward the town hall. We cut back inside to where the mayor is trying to calm everyone down, just as some people run in screaming that it's the living dead! They barricade the door just as the reanimated dead arrive, chanting "Statue! Statue!" And we cut over to the Walker place again to see that James and Taylor were the ones who pulled in before the cut. Danny and Dana are standing on either side of Uncle Fred, who's currently covered in a sheet. They start to ask the kids about who put all the decorations back up, and the duo responds saying that it's an interesting story.
Very interesting.
James asks Danny if something's wrong, and Danny starts asking, what if people who really loved Halloween, like Uncle Fred,
for example,
what if they had Halloween issues that they weren't quite over when they died? Do you think that they might try to stay and work through those issues by, rising from the grave? James isn't getting the hint, and then Uncle Fred unveils himself, the sight of which causes James and Taylor to pass out. Moments later, some random guy rushes through the house. He pauses just long enough to proclaim, "They're everywhere! We're putting up Halloween decorations!" and then runs away. When Danny and Dana call out asking who he's referring to, A horde of the undead step out from behind the doorframe and proclaim, "The zombies!" before Uncle Fred pushes his jukebox in front of the door, closing it in the process. Dana asks what they want, and they start chanting, "Statue! Statue!" Dana and company get the hint, and they start forming a plan to find it and use it as bait to lure Curtis back to his crypt so they can lock him inside. There, he'll be trapped long enough.
To lure him back to the grave.
And this, folks, is where the sad bit starts kicking in again. Because Fred here winds up reminding Danny about what happened with the weird kid with the Firefly war paint. How, after a while, the glowy stuff wouldn't glow anymore. And you can guess what he's alluding to. And, well, let's just get back to the movie before I wind up needing a tissue box. They decide to run, but Fred stays behind, stating that he can barely walk in his current condition. The kids flee, and the zombies finally get the door open. Fred acts like a stereotypical zombie and tells them in broken English that he'll take James and Taylor and eat their brains. It turns out that the zombies still speak perfect English and pulled a nice try card on him, stating that they've got other plans for them, as well as him. And Fred gets this look like, "Alright, you got me." We now cut over to Town Hall again as more of the undead are shambling towards the building. Almost everyone is still trying to keep the door shut, and the coach tells the sheriff to use his gun, to which the lawman responds, "To do what? Kill him? Besides, I know some of those zombies." The sheriff then proceeds to go over to a copy machine, saying that he wanted to leave something for his family, so that they would know what his final moments were like. He then proceeds to start screaming while making photocopies of his face, and this causes everyone else to start screaming as well. Coach Kankel then says that the zombies won't take him alive, and he charges through the barricade out of the building, which allows the undead to get inside and capture the rest. What a guy, eh, folks? Just when you think he can't get any worse, he goes and pulls a stunt like that to prove just how cowardly he really is. I mean, seriously, wait a minute. Is that zombie wearing one of those skull masks from Halloween 3? Then we get a quick cut to the chocolate factory where the zombies break in and steal a picture of Uncle Fred with Curtis Danko. Then there's another cut to Danny and Dana as they're hurrying to the Curtis house and having to take a shortcut through the cemetery. As they make their way along, Danny comments that he wonders where all the zombies are coming from since there's no holes in the ground. A couple of fireflies suddenly fly past them and they duck behind a tombstone. From this hiding spot, they suddenly hear voices from nearby and look to see a big hole in the ground, and Danny's grandmother talking to someone on an old walkie-talkie.
And my grandson, Danny Walker.
As a reminder, she's dead. When Danny recognizes her, he goes off running, hollering that his grandma's a zombie, his grandma's a zombie, over and over again, with Dana right behind him. Somehow they make it through the cemetery like this without being caught and make it to the former Danko residence. They spot a kid on the porch who's wearing a Planet of the Apes costume and ask him if he's seen Ryan Kankel. He shakes his head and goes back to looking in on the party through a gap in the boards on the window.
Thanks.
The duo shrug it off and head inside to find Ryan. It turns out that he was waiting for them, and Danny confronts him about the statue, warning him that Curtis has come back from the grave and is coming to get what's his. Just then, some kids run in screaming about zombies and rush upstairs. One of the zombies comes over and looks over Ryan's shoulder. The Kankel twerp doesn't believe it's a real zombie and proceeds to rip the poor ghoul's face off, revealing a skull with worms poking out around the eyes and mouth. They all scream and rush upstairs. All the kids, including the one with the Planet of the Apes costume, are hiding in the room where Curtis's statue had been placed by Ryan and Leo earlier. They close the door and listen to what's going on downstairs until there's a bang on the door and they briefly attempt to hold it shut. A couple of fireflies drift in through the keyhole and fly right into the eye holes of the ape kid's mask, and he reveals himself to be the remains of Curtis Danko. This causes everyone to freak out, and they rush to help Danny, Ryan, Leo, and Dana hold the door shut, but it's too little too late as the zombies break through still chanting, "Statue! Statue!" As the kids huddle together in the center of the room, the floor starts to give way, and they slowly fall through thanks to a carpet they were standing on, slowing their descent. Wait a minute. I knew it! That zombie is totally wearing one of the skull masks from Halloween 3.
Well, I'll be Grinched.
Once they finally, safely, reach the floor down below, the rug drops and we get to see that the whole town's now in Curtis' house, just awkwardly standing around. The group of zombies who got covered up by part of the rug shrug it off, and the kids go running to their parents. Then the zombies move the rug out of the way and... Hey! There he is again! Once they cleared the rug out of the way, some of the other zombies bring in a big concrete platform and set it up below the banister, and a few from upstairs lower down the statue before Curtis comes out onto the balcony and starts coming down the stairs. The gathered people start freaking out when they realize that Curtis wants to show them what his statue looks like. He walks over and looks back at Uncle Fred, who has a somber expression on his face, then reaches up for the shroud. While this is happening, Dana and Danny, thinking that these may be their final moments, tell each other that they really liked the other. How sweet. Just as Curtis is about to grab the shroud, James calls out and tells him to wait. He then tells him not to hurt these people and blames himself for all this, and Ryan calls out, "Yeah!" Curtis looks right at him and he shuts up. Then Dana speaks up and blames herself for having gotten all the kids in town so excited about Halloween, and Ryan yells, "Yeah, you did!" Then Danny blames himself, stating that he knew Ryan had stolen the statue and was too afraid to stand up to him. And Ryan goes, "Yeah, you coward!" And everyone turns to Ryan, who goes on to try and save himself by saying, "Hey, come on! I fell victim to a compelling urban legend. Who knew it was true?" A moment later, a battle cry is heard as Coach Cankle charges in full football gear, and heaves a football at Curtis Danko's head, knocking it from his body and causing him to collapse into a pile of bones. Then Cankle rushes over and starts jumping on the remains like a jerk, while everyone just stands there and watches. After he's sufficiently desecrated Curtis' remains, he starts proclaiming that he got him, starting to boast and brag and declaring that only he could have done that, not the former mayor, not the Walker family, etc., etc. While he's running his mouth, Curtis pulls himself back together, literally, and stands up. He puts his head back on, and when Coach Cankle sees this, he runs away to hide behind the others, as Curtis finally unveils his handiwork from 20 years prior. Everyone screams for a moment, expecting to be harmed by the sight of the statue, like the villains in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, but then the room falls silent as they look on to see that it's just a statue of Uncle Fred holding a jack-o'-lantern.
I don't understand.
Cankle's wife then gets furious and calls him out for having made such a big to-do over this, and making them not have a Halloween for 20 years because of that statue. While that's going on, Curtis walks over to Fred, who's confused, wondering how he could be a hero to him, since he was the one who built this kiln in which he died. Curtis goes on to point out Coach Cankle, seemingly as his real murderer. Ha! Called it! Cankle spouts off, saying that it was an accident, and we get flashbacks to that night and what really happens to Curtis. All the while, Cankle is pulling the "it was just a prank" card, saying that they were just trying to scare him, proclaiming that he didn't know the kiln would get turned on. Okay, devil's advocate here. I will grant him that there is no way of knowing that that would happen. But at the same time, with there being the possibility that it could happen, he never should have locked that door to begin with. And the fact that he got away with that for over 20 years and drugged the whole town down with him in the process, just... Oh, that's awful. It's terrible, horrible, deplorable even. But I digress. Let's continue on with his confessional, shall we? Can't wait to see where this goes. Then the mayor's wife calls him out for what he had said about the statue being so horrible, and about how it had blinded him for 3 days. He opens up and says that he couldn't let everyone see that he had been wrong about Curtis. Then James figures out and calls out the fact that Cankle was the one who came up with all the curse nonsense, and took away Halloween for 20 years and demands to know why. Cankle caves, and he admits to having been jealous of that statue, stating how he knew that if anyone ever saw it, he'd have no chance of his statue of his father being chosen for the town square. James steps up for his dad for the first time in the film, stating how Uncle Fred gave until it hurt in ways Cankle would never understand. Cankle's true colors start coming through when he starts going off about how generous Uncle Fred was when it came to arts and crafts and drama and the marching band and all that sissy stuff, but when it came to asking for money for the Football World theme park and RV campground that his dad wanted to build, he'd just stare at you like you were some kind of nutcase. At this point, Coach Cankle's deceased father calls him by his full name. He comes in and grabs Michael Edward Cankle and drags him out by his ear, proclaiming that he's going to give him a beating that he'll remember for the rest of his years. After he's gone, Curtis starts clapping his mummified hands, and Uncle Fred turns around to see him standing there behind him. Then everyone else starts clapping for him. Once the clapping stops, Fred thanks him and Curtis walks away. Just as he crosses the threshold out into the night, someone calls out, "Happy Halloween!" He turns back for a moment, then walks off into the night. At this point, everyone starts leaving the house, zombies and the living alike. Danny, James, and Fred have yet to step out of the place and are just kind of standing around when Danny's grandmother steps out from behind the stand the statue's on. James spots her first and softly says, "Mom?" Fred and Danny turn and look, with Fred saying, "Doris?" And we get a bit of a nice, if somewhat macabre reunion as she greets them and exclaims that she must look a sight, huh? Fred tells her that she looks good, all things considered.
All things considered.
She tells him that he looks like he needs some rest. Danny comes over and asks how he's feeling, and he says that he's feeling okay. Then he tells Danny to help Dana with her mother so he can spend a moment with James. Danny says he understands and then does as he's told. Fred pulls James aside and James asks how he's really feeling. Fred says that he's never felt better and asks if he wants to know why, before telling him that the reason is because now he really knows that he is loved.
Finally, really know that I'm loved.
James says that there's 320 pictures in his old office that should have told him that a long time ago. Fred replies with, "Not by the kids of Walker Falls, James, but by you. And after tonight you'll probably never see me again, but I'll see you, and I'll be very, very, very proud." James starts to look misty-eyed and simply says thanks after that. Then Uncle Fred tells him that he'd like to use the time he's got left to take Doris dancing among the fireflies. With that, we cut to a blue-for-night shot of all the zombies outside dancing in the moonlight and the living watching on. Then James goes on to ask Taylor a question, and they awkwardly allude to the idea of them getting together. She responds that they should keep Danny and Dana a few blocks apart, at least for a few years, because they've got all the time in the world. And it would also be quite odd if they were suddenly step-siblings and they were in love. Don't think about that too hard, folks. Then we get a shot of the kids looking at each other with the undead dancing in the background among the fireflies. They share a kiss before looking upon the dancers again, just as Uncle Fred waltzes by with Doris. He pauses mid-step and calls to Danny before throwing him his favorite Hot Wheels car, the Red Baron. Danny looks back at him in shock before they danced away again, while the narration carries on. Times beyond this time, worlds beyond this world. All too much to worry about when you've got a whole world of pimples and bullies and girls to deal with in the here and now. Then we cut to Curtis Danko watching from a distance before turning and walking away as the camera pans up to a big bright full moon in the sky. This gets overlaid with the zombie dancers as they dance into the morning light, with Uncle Fred's narration explaining what's going on. How they danced till dawn, said their goodbyes to their loved ones, and danced to dust. We then cut to later that morning with everyone cleaning up the town square just as the secretary and the German investors pull up and screech to a halt. The investors stumble out of the car and the main guy, Herr Schmidt, marches over to James and repeats what the zombies have been saying all night while clinging to the car. Trick or treat? Schmell mein feet? Give me something good to eat, He starts chuckling and then out loud laughing before proclaiming that they would be doubling their investment on one condition, that they put on an even bigger spooktacular next year. James agrees but tells him they'll have to wait for 2 weeks to get the planning started. and when Herr Schmidt asks what he's going to do in Walker Falls for 2 weeks, the secretary clears her throat to get his attention. He looks and she awkwardly smiles and waves, and he smiles back with a Then it's back over to James, Danny, Dana, and Taylor as they laugh. Then a transition over to the statue of Uncle Fred in the town square with kids running by in Halloween costumes. One child pauses and proclaims, "Happy Halloween!" up to the statue. Then the camera pans up towards Fred's face, and he, as the narrator, plainly says, "Happy Halloween," before the movie fades out to black and the credits begin. See, I told you it was an emotional picture. Anyway, here at the end, I just wanted to say that this movie, as silly and as corny as it may be at times, it does have a lot of heart to it. And at the end of the day, it's the story of a young lad getting to spend one more day with his dearly departed grandfather. And at the end of the day, who among us hasn't had someone in their lives like that they would love to have that kind of an opportunity with? If you haven't seen this flick and you can find it, then by all means do yourself a favor and watch it. Is it perfect? No. Of course not. No film truly is, but is it a fun little ride that knows how to simultaneously thrill you and jerk tears from your eyes? You bet your sweet bippy it is. Also, if you can track down a copy of the book, do yourself a favor and do that first, because this little bad boy fills in some gaps, a lot of gaps, that are left out of the film, and just makes it that much more of a complete experience. With that all said, viewers beware, and subscribe if you dare.